They called me ungrateful after I paid off their debt. Can you believe that? Stick with me while I share my story. And if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Nola, I'm 28, and I've always been independent. I work hard, save carefully, and try to help people when I can. My parents, Clive and Juna, were never the easiest people to deal with. They always expected a lot, and compliments were rare. But when I discovered they were drowning in debt, I felt I had to help. They never asked me, never mentioned it directly, but I knew they were struggling. I decided to pay off their $50,000 debt in secret. It took years of saving and careful planning, but I managed it. I thought this would make them happy, that they would finally see I loved them and cared for them. But instead of gratitude, I got cold stares and criticism. Clive said, "You think you're better than us?" Juna just shook her head, muttering about how I spent my money foolishly. I felt shocked and hurt. I had given them a gift from my heart, and they treated it like an insult. I started remembering my childhood, how they often compared me to my cousin Tess, and made me feel like nothing I did was ever enough. The praise I craved was rare, and the love I felt was conditional. I realized that helping them didn't change anything. Their attitude, their way of looking down on me, hadn't disappeared. If anything, it felt stronger now. My friend Dexter, who I trust completely, told me I was enabling. At first, I resisted, but then I noticed how manipulative they had always been. Every conversation was a test, every compliment was conditional, and their anger came whenever I tried to assert myself. It hit me hard. I had spent years trying to please them, and now even my biggest act of love was met with bitterness. One night, I confronted them calmly, asking why they were so ungrateful. Juna shouted, "Ungrateful? We gave you life." Clive added, "You owe us respect, not money." My heart broke. I had poured everything I had into helping them, and they twisted it into an accusation. That's when I realized that love from them would always come with guilt and control. I decided I needed to protect myself. I quietly made my finances untouchable, started planning for my own future, and helped others outside my family instead. When Clive tried to rope me into a risky investment, I pretended to be naive while keeping records of everything. I wanted to make sure I would never be trapped by them again. Eventually, I revealed to them that their debt was fully paid. I had ensured it couldn't be used against me. They were shocked, and Juna even cried, saying she just wanted me to appreciate them. I told them I already did, by showing what love without control looks like. They realized they had lost their grip, but it was too late. I was done being manipulated. Now, I live on my own, surrounded by friends who value me for who I am. I look back and feel sad, but also strong. I learned that loving someone doesn't mean letting them hurt or control you. Sometimes the best revenge isn't anger. It's living your best life, free and unafraid. When I finally told my parents the debt was cleared, I expected smiles, hugs, maybe even a few tears of relief. Instead, they barely acknowledged it. Juna muttered something about how I shouldn't waste my money, and Clive gave me that familiar hard stare. Then he said, "You think you're better than us?" Like my gesture of help was an insult. I froze for a moment, hurt washing over me. How could they react like this after everything I had done? I wanted to shout, to explain, to make them see my intentions, but instead, I forced myself to stay calm and brush it off. I told myself maybe they were just stressed, maybe it would pass. But the comments didn't stop. Every interaction became a minefield. Juna would sigh loudly when I suggested anything involving money, or remark that I was too careful or too ambitious. Clive would make offhand jokes about how I thought I was smarter than everyone else, or remind me how things were different in his day. The guilt trips were constant, subtle, and exhausting. At first, I questioned myself. Maybe I had misread things, maybe I had overstepped. But deep down, I knew what I had done was right. The way they twisted gratitude into criticism made me realize something painful. Their approval was never going to be enough. No matter what I did, it would never satisfy them, and I was starting to see how long I had been carrying their emotional weight. Every dinner, every conversation, even a simple phone call became a test of patience. I started noticing how little they acknowledged my sacrifices and how often they tried to make me feel guilty for living my own. It hurt more than I wanted to admit, but it also lit a spark inside me, a quiet determination not to let their attitude control me anymore. I realized that paying off the debt hadn't changed them. It hadn't made them grateful or loving. It had only revealed the truth about their expectations and manipulations. And as hurtful as it was, that truth was something I needed to see if I ever wanted to protect myself. When I think back, the roots of this all stretch to my teenage years. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, doing my homework, while Juna praised my cousin Tess for her perfect grades or her new clothes. It didn't matter how hard I worked. It was never enough. Every compliment I longed for was given to someone else, and I felt invisible in my own home. Clive would often compare me to Tess too, saying things like, "Why can't you be more like her?" or "Tess would have handled this better." I learned early on that love in our house came with strings attached. To get any recognition, I had to outperform, overachieve, and constantly prove myself, even though nothing I did ever seemed to satisfy them. Those years left me feeling like I was always fighting for a place, always battling for acknowledgement. I became determined, almost stubborn, driven by a need to succeed not just for myself, but to finally earn the approval I crave. But with every small victory, I also felt the sting of betrayal, as though my efforts were invisible or dismissed. I remember one birthday, when I proudly showed them a school award, and Juna barely looked up from her book. Clive muttered that Tess would have done better. That moment burned into me. It was then I realized that in my family, love was conditional, and validation was a battle. Even now, as an adult, I see those seeds of betrayal everywhere. They taught me to rely on myself, to fight quietly, and to guard my heart. But they also left scars that shaped how I approached them as an adult, how I gave, and how I expected nothing in return but honesty, which I never received. Those early experiences explain so much. Why I paid off their debt, why I hoped for gratitude, and why their cold reaction hurt me so deeply. The childhood lessons of comparison and neglect had prepared me to endure disappointment, but they also planted the first whispers of strength and independence that I would need later. Dexter had been a steady presence in my life for years, more like a mentor than just a friend. One evening, over coffee, he looked me in the eyes and said something that stopped me cold. "Nola, you're letting them walk over you. You're enabling them, not helping them." His words hit harder than anything my parents had ever said. I tried to argue at first, telling myself I was only doing what was right, that I was being kind. But deep down, I knew he was right. I had spent so much of my life bending to their moods, adjusting my choices to fit their expectations, hoping they would finally love me without conditions. Instead, I had been feeding a cycle that only made them more controlling and ungrateful. That night, I started paying closer attention. Every conversation, every request, every sigh or half-hearted thank you was recorded in my mind. I began keeping notes. Small things, the subtle ways they tried to manipulate me, the moments where they twisted my intentions into guilt trips or excuses to assert power. It was like seeing the house of mirrors in my childhood finally take shape. As I documented everything, a painful clarity emerged. My parents didn't act out of love, they acted out of control. Their care always came with strings, always attached to my behavior or obedience. The moments I had thought were expressions of gratitude or pride were really about maintaining their dominance over me. I realized that my loyalty had been misplaced. I had spent decades trying to earn a love that was never freely given, and in doing so, I had ignored my own needs and boundaries. That realization was both devastating and liberating. I understood now that the debt I had paid was not just money. It was a test of my patience, my values, and my willingness to submit. Dexter's words echoed in my mind as I sat in my room that night, making a quiet vow. I would no longer let their control dictate my life. I would continue to be compassionate, but I would do it on my terms, with awareness and boundaries. And most importantly, I would never let them manipulate me again. This turning point changed everything. For the first time, I was no longer just a dutiful daughter trying to please my parents. I was someone who could see the truth clearly, someone who could act with intention, and someone who finally understood that love forced or controlled was not love at all. I waited for a quiet evening when the tension in the house was low, and I decided to speak up. I approached them carefully, my voice soft but steady, trying to explain how their reaction to what I'd done had hurt me. I told them that after everything, I had only hoped for a simple acknowledgement, maybe a word of thanks, and instead I felt dismissed. Juna's face twisted instantly, her patience evaporated. "Ungrateful? We gave you life," she shouted, her voice echoing through the living room. Clive remained silent, but gave me a glare that made my chest tighten. It was as though all my efforts had been erased, replaced by anger and accusation. My heart felt like it had shattered into pieces. I had poured so much care and sacrifice into helping them, and now it was returned with venom. The pain was raw, sharper than anything I had imagined. I wanted to retreat, to cry, but I also felt a strange clarity form. In that moment, a seed began to grow inside me, not of hatred, but of resolve. I realized that their cruelty wasn't just hurtful, it was revealing. Their inability to appreciate what I had done, their readiness to twist it into blame, showed exactly how much power they sought to hold over me. I left the room quietly, pretending to withdraw, but inside a plan began to form. I knew I couldn't change them, and I couldn't rely on them for love or respect. If I wanted peace, I would have to reclaim it myself. And that thought, bitter as it was, sparked a determination that would guide my next steps. After that confrontation, I knew I had to take control of my life in a way I never had before. I couldn't let their behavior continue to dictate my choices or drain my energy. I started thinking strategically, quietly mapping out ways to reclaim my independence without making it obvious. It wasn't about revenge in a loud, dramatic sense. It was about reclaiming power in a way that protected me and taught them boundaries. The first step was securing my finances. I set up accounts and investments entirely in my name, separate from anything they could touch or influence. I made sure every dollar I earned, saved, or planned to spend was insulated from their manipulations. It felt empowering to know that, for the first time, my money couldn't be used as leverage against me. While I built this financial safety net, I also shifted my focus outward. I started quietly supporting other relatives who were struggling, not to gain anything, but to remind myself that generosity didn't have to come with strings attached. Helping them gave me a sense of purpose that wasn't entangled with guilt or manipulation, and I could see the tangible difference I was making without being drained emotionally. As I worked through these steps, a realization settled in my chest. Their debt, the money I had spent clearing it, the financial stress I had carried, they didn't define love or family. What defined my relationship with them was something far harsher. Their selfishness, their insistence on control, and their refusal to acknowledge the sacrifices of others. I began to separate my heart from their behavior, understanding that my efforts were never about earning their approval. They were about living in alignment with my values. Every decision I made during that period, every move to protect myself, every quiet act of support for others, was a step toward freedom. I felt a sense of clarity and purpose that I had never experienced before, as though I was reclaiming pieces of myself that had long been overshadowed by their demands. I wasn't just planning for financial security. I was building a life where my love, generosity, and energy could exist on my terms, free from judgment or manipulation. By the time I looked back on the first months of these changes, I realized I was no longer motivated by anger or hurt alone. I was motivated by a quiet determination to live authentically, to give where it mattered, and to guard my life against those who could never value it properly. The plan wasn't just about money or independence. It was about reclaiming myself, and slowly, I felt a sense of empowerment that I had never known before. Clive approached me one afternoon with what he called a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He wanted me to co-sign a risky investment, insisting it was foolproof and that I would regret not helping. At first, I acted unsure, letting him talk and watching his enthusiasm with a calm, neutral expression. I pretended I didn't fully understand the details, nodding and asking simple questions, all while keeping my emotions carefully in check. While he rambled, I pulled out my phone discreetly and started recording everything. Every exaggeration, every attempt to pressure me, every subtle guilt trip was captured. I wanted proof of their reckless manipulations, evidence that I could use to remind myself why I had to stay untangled. I didn't intervene immediately. Instead, I let them continue their reckless financial decisions, knowing that I had insulated myself from any risk. Watching them, part of me felt the old familiar sting of disappointment and sadness. How could people I loved act so carelessly? But another part of me was quietly growing stronger, recognizing the freedom I had carved for myself. As they excitedly planned and imagined potential gains, I realized that I had set the trap perfectly. They could continue down their path, thinking I was still under their influence, while in reality, I was untouchable. Their manipulations no longer held sway over me, and I could observe without fear or obligation. In those quiet moments, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and empowerment. Sorrow for the years I had allowed myself to be controlled, for the constant need to protect and placate. Empowerment because now, for the first time, I could act with clarity and intention, shielded from their influence, while still witnessing the consequences of their choices. It was a revelation. I didn't have to fight them head-on or argue. I simply had to stand apart, letting their actions reveal the truth on their own. And in that silence, I discovered a strength I hadn't known I possessed, a quiet confidence that I could finally navigate my life without being pulled into their chaos. One evening, I decided it was time to lay everything out. I calmly told them that their debt was completely cleared. I watched their faces carefully, expecting some reaction, some relief. But instead, there was shock, almost disbelief. I made sure to add that I had taken steps to protect myself financially, ensuring that nothing they did could ever compromise me again. Every account, every investment, every dollar was beyond their reach. For a moment, the room was silent. Clive's jaw tightened, and Juna's eyes filled with tears. She started to tremble, her voice breaking as she whispered, "I just wanted you to appreciate us." Her words hung in the air, raw and vulnerable, a mix of regret and accusation. I could see the tension in their bodies, the sudden awareness that they no longer had the leverage they had relied on for so long. I took a slow breath and met their gaze without flinching. "I did," I said firmly but calmly. "I showed you what love without control looks like. I could feel the weight of years of manipulation and unspoken rules lifting off me as I spoke. My statement wasn't meant to shame them, but to mark a boundary they had never respected. The realization hit them slowly. They could no longer pressure me with guilt, no longer twist my generosity into obedience. In that moment, I finally felt a sense of clarity, an understanding that their need for control had always been stronger than their gratitude. But I also felt peace, because I had acted in alignment with my own values, not theirs. I left the room with a quiet confidence, feeling lighter than I had in years. They were confronted with the truth of their behavior, and I was free from the tension and fear that had always accompanied our interactions. For the first time, I understood that protecting myself didn't mean abandoning them. It meant asserting the boundaries that love should never cross. As I walked away, I knew I had changed the dynamic forever. I hadn't sought vengeance through anger or retaliation. I had reclaimed my power and shown them the consequences of their selfishness. It was a revelation not just for them, but for me, a confirmation that I could give fully without being diminished, and that the love I offered had value, even if they could not see it. After the revelation, my parents started trying to make amends, but it felt hollow. They offered apologies that seemed rehearsed, gifts that carried strings, and compliments that didn't reach the heart of the issues. I watched closely and noticed the old patterns creeping back, subtle attempts to guilt me, small criticisms disguised as concern, reminders of past mistakes. It became clear that their behavior hadn't truly changed, only adapted to the new circumstance. I realized I couldn't allow myself to fall back into old habits. I pulled back emotionally, setting firm boundaries, and focused on living independently. I rented my own space, managed my finances without interference, and prioritized relationships that were reciprocal and respectful. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the constant weight of guilt pressing me to please them or justify my actions. I also began taking small, quiet steps to assert my autonomy. I stopped sharing financial details, declined involvement in any of their ventures, and subtly removed their access to anything that could affect me. I didn't boast or confront them aggressively. I simply protected myself, letting them realize that they no longer held control. Each action, though small, strengthened my confidence and reminded me that I was reclaiming my life. In those moments, a strange but powerful sense of closure washed over me. I could see the full circle of betrayal, the childhood comparisons, the manipulation, the lack of gratitude, and recognize that I had survived and grown stronger because of it. I didn't need their approval or affection to validate my worth. The tension, the resentment, and the fear that had defined my relationship with them for so long finally began to dissolve. For the first time, I felt truly free. I could care without being exploited, love without compromise, and exist fully on my own terms. The closure wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and profoundly satisfying. I had reclaimed my autonomy, and in doing so, I realized that the power to define my life had always been mine to begin with. I finally moved into my own apartment, a space that felt completely mine, filled with light, quiet, and the people who genuinely cared about me. My friends welcomed me without judgment, without expectation, and for the first time in years, I felt fully seen and appreciated for who I was, not for what I could do for someone else. Sitting in that calm, familiar space, I reflected on everything that had happened. I realized that love shouldn't come with chains. Protecting my heart didn't make me selfish. It made me whole. I understood now that letting someone control or hurt me wasn't a test of loyalty or character. It was a trap I no longer had to fall into. I thought about the debt I had cleared for my parents and the countless ways I had given of myself over the years. It could have been a story of bitterness or regret, but instead, it became a story of awakening. I saved them from their financial burden, yes, but more importantly, I saved myself from the emotional weight that had defined my life for far too long. There was a bittersweetness to it all. I would always care for them, but that care would never again compromise my freedom or peace of mind. Every decision I had made, the boundaries, the independence, the quiet acts of self-protection, had led me here, to a place where I could live fully, freely, and without fear of manipulation. Sometimes the best revenge is living your best life. And for the first time, I truly felt I was doing just that. Hey besties, thanks for sticking with me till the end of this emotional ride. I cleared my parents' debt, only to face their criticism and manipulation. Through heartbreak and betrayal, I learned to protect myself, set boundaries, and reclaim my independence. Sometimes the hardest lessons lead to the strongest growth. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, drop a comment, and subscribe for more. See you next time.